Okay, so let's go ahead and get started and talk about what I'm doing here. Now, the first thing I'm doing is you will see that I'm starting my Xampp player, which I can locate in my program files, and you should have that downloaded. Xampp, just do a search on your Windows machine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Xampp file. I'm going to make sure that Apache and MySQL are both started. And then to do that, I'm going to press my Start button. And then both of these modules should now become green. None of these scripts will work if the Apache is not started. Okay, the next thing that we're going to end up doing is I'm going to now confirm that the Xampp is working correctly, and I'm going to check my file directory. I'm going to go to computer, located by hitting my Windows button, computer. I'm going to go to my C drive. I am going to double click on the Xampp folder, and then I'm going to locate the folder htdocs, and you're going to see that is in the browser URL bar there, directory. And in the htdocs folder, I have located here all of my files that I'm going to try to run through my Xampp machine. Now, the important thing is we want to set it up the correct way on the Xampp so it'll work on the Seminole State server also. But this is my testing location, and then I will go ahead and export everything over to the Seminole State. Now, by all means, if you want to start at the Seminole State server and do everything on that machine, or on that server, and not use your local machine, you can definitely do that also. But notice I have a Xampp, and inside my Xampp I have an htdocs folder. Now, to make sure that the Xampp is working correctly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a browser window. I'm going to type in localhost. Now, once I've typed in localhost, Xampp for Windows should automatically come up. I should see that on the screen. If I scroll down on the left under Tools, I'm going to see phpMyAdmin. phpMyAdmin is where you set up your databases, which you did for phase 1 and you've been doing for a couple labs now. Okay, so each of these databases are like a structure that hold content. To create a new database, I click on the Home button. Click on Database. I type in, create the database name. So let's say I type in, let's do a test 5 here. Then what I'll do is press create. Okay, and it says database has been created. Now what I'm going to do is if I scroll down on the left hand side under the home icon, I'm going to see test 5. Under test 5 I have no table, so I need to make a table. For phase 1 you were to have a login screen, so I'm going to create a users table. That table is going to have at least 3 columns. We have in there a user ID column. Okay, now with the user ID, we're looking back at phase 1 and we're looking back at the requirements for phase 1. And in phase 1 you're going to see which is leading into phase 2, which we're starting this week. In phase 1 you were supposed to create a login screen having a username and password, and you were supposed to have a styles or a CSS style or look to your website and really determine what product you're going to make. For phase 2 we're going to work with user information. Now we're going into entering information, product information to the database. Now, for phase 1, you were supposed to have a database, and we had a user ID. I'm going to have that set up as an integer because it's a number. Username is varchar, and password is varchar. My length is going to be 30 characters, which means it can be up to 30 characters length. Notice there is an AI under user ID. This is an auto increment. Now I press save, I get the green submission, and now I have a users table. If I look at my users table, what's going to happen here under the users table is I should have a user ID, I should have a username, and I should have a password. If I look at the structure, you're going to see everything set up there now. Okay, so I have everything set up, and notice user ID is under auto increment. Okay, so if I go to insert now and I click under user ID, I'm not going to put anything there because it's going to auto increment or create their own. Under the username, I'm going to type R Rosario, And under password, I'm going to type password. This means I'm entering a username and a password into my table that's located in my database. Notice here, though, if I look at the SQL, it's automatically generated it for me. PHP My Admin is a WYSIWYG version, equivalent to Weaver is to HTML. So it says insert into test5 users, user ID, user name, and password. I'm going to enter these values. Well, if I go to browse, though, you're going to see that they're entered in there. Notice that user ID is automatically as a 1. This is an auto increment. If I enter in another username and password, it will be user ID 2. So on my login screen where I have a username and password, I will never ask the user for their user ID. Okay, so let's experiment and try this out. Now, if I look under assignments and look at the description for phase 1 is asking that you create a login screen. There were two options. You could create the username and password in a database, which is the more traditional way of, more secure way of creating a login. Or what you could do is have your username and password stored in a text file. Now, I gave you a tutorial in phase 1 that showed you how to create a username and password by form of a database using a users table. And you're going to see again that is under the online sources. It's the second bullet down. That was the one I suggested that you use. You can also use your textbook. Now, if you decide to use a tutorial that I gave you under phase 1, you're going to notice that sessions, it uses sessions, and a session is used to make sure that you can't just automatically type in the web address to get to the second page of the website without the correct username and password. So the session register, which is used in that tutorial, has been deprecated, and you are to be using the sessions. Now, as we move into phase 2, into phase 3, we're going to start to work with sessions. The topic for week 10 was sessions, and you saw that in your work last week. So what you're going to be doing now is implementing sessions and into your phase 1, and also creating a username and password. Now, the website that talks about the deprecation of the sessions that is used in your machine or used in your phase 1 is also under your phase 1 assignment. Now, what we're going to do is talk about moving into phase 2. But first, before we got to do that, we've got to test our connection script. So first thing I need to do, make sure Xampp is working and open. I make sure that PHP My Admin is working. Then I'm going to check my connection script. To do that, I'm going to go into my htdocs folder, into my folder where I'm keeping all my work. Mine is called Phase 5 Lecture Notes. In Phase 5 Lecture Notes, you see I have a MySQL Connect script. Inside of my Includes folder, I have all my PHP scripts. My SQL Connect script, if it's working and I am establishing a connection to my database, which is the first thing I need to get phase 2 working, I need to make sure that it's working correctly. So my MySQL Connect, you're going to see, is outside of my Includes folder, which is also what your textbook does. Now, to test my SQL Connect, what I need to do is I should get a white screen. So I'm going to go to localhost. I'm going to type in Phase 5 Lecture Notes because that is the name of my folder where I'm keeping all my work at. That Phase 5 Lecture Notes is stored in my htdocs folder. And then I press Enter. And as soon as I press Enter, it gives me my directory of everything that is in my folder in that Phase 5 Lecture Notes. Now, you can call the folder whatever you want, but the main thing is you're going to see here is I have an Includes folder, right? And inside of my Includes folder, I have all my PHP scripts. The MySQL Connect, when I click on it, should give me a white screen. If it gives me a white screen, what it does is it means that I have established a connection to the database. This is going to be the hardest that you work for getting a white screen in HTML. It's just kind of a funny joke. Now, if I look at the MySQL Connect, you're going to see a couple of things are established on here. Here we have established the connection to the database user. We have the password. We also have the name of the server, and we also have the name of, here's our password right on here. Okay, so our database user is going to be your student number because we want to make it work on the Seminole State side. The database password is going to be the password that was sent to Sakai through messages, and it does have to match up with the Seminole State password. The database host is going to be webdev.seminolestate.edu. You're going to use that for phase 2 because for phase 2 you have to get it working on the Seminole State website. So if you go to webdev.seminolestate.edu/phpMyAdmin, you then get access to your database. Now, your database name is the same thing as your student number. So all this is going to match up because I want it to work on the Seminole State website. The only thing, though, under database host, when I'm testing it on my computer, my local machine using Xampp, I will put in localhost there. When I am trying to get it to work on the Seminole State website, I will put in webdev.seminolestate.edu. But you really want to make sure that the database username and password are the same as what you would have on the Seminole State server. That way you can recreate and simulate the same thing. And that's what you were asked to do in phase 1. If anyone has any problems with that, you need to make sure that you're asking me for help. Okay, now what's going to happen is we are going to go here and we're going to look at this users file. Now in the users.txt file, which is located in my localhost or my includes folder, you're going to see I have a username and a password, and that username and password is separated by a colon. I could have as many usernames and passwords as I wanted in here, but they must be separated by a colon to get this script to work correctly. All the scripts that I'm using in this are available for you under week 11. Now, you're going to see here the users file is going to be used to store the username and password that is used to gain access to the welcome page of my screen. Now for phase 1, you could make you're going to see under users.text I have a username and password. And when I go to login, I can type in R. Rosario, and I can type in the password and log in, and it does give me access to my welcome screen or my admin.php, which is my equivalent to my welcome screen. Now for phase 1, the description said you could store the username and password in a separate file, or you could create a user's database and store the username and password in there like your textbook does, and also the website I provided for you. Either is okay, but be aware in the real world you will typically not store your username and password in a text file on the server. Now here you're going to see on login.php, I'm going to first look at my form. The form's name is admin, and when I hit submit on this form, it's going to run the function validate form right here. And what's going to happen is I'm going to collect, I have a text box for username and a text box for password. Both the text box for username has the name of username, the text box for password has the username and password, or the name of password. Notice that here it says if is set post submit. So if the user presses the submit button, I'm going to use the post, PHP post, which means I'm going to gather the username from the form. I'm going to use post password. I'm going to gather the password from the form. I'm going to store the username in a variable called user, and I'm going to store the password in a variable called pass. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the fopen function, and I'm going to open users.text. Now, in PHP, there are several predefined functions that exist, and a function is like a mini program. And if I go to php.net and I type in fopen, you're going to see, or any function that exists in PHP, it will tell me what that function does. The fopen function is specifically used to open URLs or open files. In this case, we're using it to open the users.text page or file that saves my username and password. If I scroll down further, you can see here there is an example of code they provide for you at php.net, and you can type in any function here in php.net and it will give you a description and sample code of what that function does. And a function is indicated by the name, like such as fopen, and then I have a parentheses, which tells me it's a function very similar to JavaScript. Now you're going to see that there are all these modes that are available for fopen. Now for fopen, I have the name of the file, user.txt, and I have this R. What the R does, it says it opens for reading only, and it places a file pointer at the beginning of the file. So if I want to gather the usernames and passwords from my users.txt, I can do that, and I can grab them out of there. So if we look back at the source code here, you're going to see while users.txt, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get users.txt. I'm going to store all the information that's in users.txt in the variable called file. Now it says while feof file. Now if I want to look for what feof function means in PHP, I can go to php.net, type in the function, and I can see here that it means, it checks to see if the file has gotten to the end, if the pointer has reached the end of the file. So I've created a while statement here, and the while statement is going to say while while the file, which is users.txt, if we are not at the end of this file, that's what it's saying. Notice there's an exclamation mark there. Just like JavaScript and other languages, that exclamation means while not. So while not end of the file, I am going to use the function called explode. And explode is used with an array. And as we stated, and earlier you've seen this in your multiple programming courses at SSC, but the explode function, what it does is it's going to take all the information that is in that users.txt file, and it's going to put it into an array. And an array is equivalent to, like, if I had a pillbox and I had one, that pillbox was one name, let's call it days of the week or something, and then the first container would be Monday, the second container Tuesday. So what I'm doing is I'm taking all the information that's in that users.txt, I'm going to stick it in an array. There's only two pieces of information in there, though. There is a username, there's a password, and there is a colon. Now you're going to notice that when I use the explodes function, there's this thing called the delimiter. The delimiter is going to be that equivalent of what is going to be the syntax, or the syntax that's going to separate the things that I'm going to stick in this array. In this case, the delimiter is going to be a colon. Now notice here that there is no space before or after the colon. I need to keep it like that. It's a username colon, then I'm going to put the password. So if I look at the source code here of my login.php, you're going to see I have a colon there. Then I have rtrim, which really is a function to get rid of all of the space before and after the username and password. So that's kind of make sure there's no empty spaces. What I'm going to do then is I take the username, I put it into the first array, or index 0, and I put into the first index 1 the password. So if the user and the password match up with my information that's in my text file, I get an authenticate equals true. So here I'm checking to make sure the username and password are correct with what is in the text file, and if so, I get an authenticate true. Then we break out of the loop the while statement, and if it authenticates, we're going to go to admin.php using the define base URL statement. Now I could put an if else in here, and if it doesn't authenticate, I would say else wrong password, and I would reload my login.php. For the example that I have for you, it's very simple. You're not going to be doing that on this file. Now again, for phase 1, what you were supposed to do is you were supposed to simply have a username and password. When entered correctly using PHP, you get access to the welcome screen. Okay, and for phase 2, we're going to do something a little bit more than that. But for phase 1, you were supposed to get access to your entry screen. So there are lots of different ways to do this, and I'd like to see how you guys come up with it. But for phase 2, we're going to go further now. For phase 2, what we're going to do is we are going to enter information into your database, product information. Again, for phase 1, if you're struggling with phase 1, you need to reach out to me and ask me for help, and we'll work through it this week and get this all working. Phase 2 is due on Friday. Okay, remember that phase 1 I provided for you the textbook to use, the tutorials that I've given to you. If you follow the textbook, you're going to see that sessions are used, but that's not a requirement for phase 1. Several people did include sessions because they used the tutorial that I gave them. Remember that the session register is deprecated, so when we get in, by the time we get to phase 3, you will have to have sessions and cookies in there. Okay, well, if anyone, make sure you're reaching out to me if you have any questions or concerns.